Hello, everyone, and welcome to Slash Film Daily for July 23rd, 2018. On today's show, we're going to talk about the big news that hit over Comic-Con, and that is Disney's firing of Guardians of the Galaxy director James Gunn. This is Slash Film Editor-in-Chief Peter Sciretta, and joining me on today's podcast is Slash Film Weekend Editor Brad Oman.
Hey, that's me.
Slash Film Senior Writer Ben Pearson.
Hey, what's going on?
And writers Hoai-Tran
Hey, everyone.
and Chris Evangelista.
Hello.
Okay, before we get into this, I want to thank everybody for listening to our coverage of Comic-Con. We are exhausted. I also want to thank HT and Ben for kicking butt while we were in San Diego, because it seemed like there was just days filled with lots of news. And normally we would have done an emergency podcast about this James Gunn news, but our staff was literally spread too thin, so we just couldn't get to it. So you know what, and it's probably for the better, because I feel like having the weekend to think about this and to formulate an opinion, it's probably going to do us all a little bit better, I think. But before that, I do want to say Comic-Con was exhausting, guys. I don't know. I'm not sure if it's the fact that, Marvel wasn't there and HBO wasn't there and Netflix wasn't there with their big thing, so there was less exciting panels. There wasn't really any big surprises outside of, Disney bringing back the Clone Wars animated series. There was some sad news. John Schnepp, who was a director of that Superman Lives documentary and a colleague of ours who, worked at Collider and a bunch of other outlets, died of a stroke, was, looming over the whole event. And then this James Gunn news hit, and it was not my Comic-Con. I've been going for, I think, 11 or 12 years now, and it just felt wrong. Brad, do you have any post-mortem thoughts on this year's Comic-Con?
No, I mean, I'm pretty much right there with you. I've been going for, I think this was my 9th year, and there was something about it where it just didn't feel quite as exciting, and I don't know if part of it was that it seemed like maybe we were running around more because the panels were more spread out instead of spending so much time in Hall H, or if it was, like you said, a lack of Marvel and some of the bigger things and the lack of surprises that made it feel not quite as exciting, or, just the cloud. But yeah, something about this year's Comic-Con didn't feel quite that great. Like, I don't want to necessarily outright say, man, this Comic-Con sucked, because I still, had some good times and got to hang out with the Slash Film crew and picked up some things from the show floor. But it just didn't feel quite as magical or as exciting as Comic-Con has in the past.
Chris, this was your first Comic-Con. What do you think? What were your thoughts?
I think I'm glad I did this, and I never want to do it again. I knew what I was getting into in some sense. I knew about the lines. I knew about, all that stuff. At the same time, I just wasn't mentally prepared for all of this, and I don't know if I ever will be. I don't want to oversell it as like this, torturous event, because in the end, I did have a good time with certain things. Like, I loved the Halloween footage I saw was amazing. It was great to meet you guys who I've never actually met in person before, and I got to see some other people I know, and so stuff like that was great. But a lot of it just gets frustrating after a while. And when you boil it all down, waiting in line for hours to watch 2 minutes of footage is like the act of a mad person. And the fact that it's become this huge thing, I can't really quantify it in my brain. And, by the last day, or I guess the second to last day, I was in line for something. I was outside, I was covered in sweat, and I was literally about to just be like, you know what? Fuck off. Everyone in front of me, just fuck off. So, yeah, that's my Comic-Con takeaway.
Well, to be fair, this has not been the typical Comic-Con as Brad and I suggested. Usually you're waiting in long lines to stay in a hall all day and not just see 2 minutes of footage. But yeah, that's just how things turned out. But we should talk about, let's move on to talk about the main topic, and that is James Gunn getting fired as the director of Guardians of the Galaxy 3 by Disney. This happened on Friday. HT, you wrote this up for the site. Tell us what happened.
So Friday afternoon, Disney announced that James Gunn would be fired from directing Guardians of the Galaxy 3 after helming the first two wildly successful Guardians of the Galaxy films. And this was in response to the James Gunn's old tweets that had resurfaced recently and were causing controversy on Twitter. And they were old tweets that were tweeted before he was hired by Disney and Marvel to direct Guardians of the Galaxy, and a lot of them were jokes about rape and pedophilia, and were basically resurfaced by conservative bloggers Mike Cernovich and Jack Posobiec. And James Gunn shortly after issued an apology on Twitter, and then issued another one that was released to the press, saying, I will read a little bit of his press apology. Quote, "My words of nearly a decade ago were, at the time, totally failed and unfortunate events to be provocative. I've regretted them for many years since, not just because they were stupid, not at all funny, wildly insensitive, and certainly not provocative like I had hoped, but also because they don't reflect the person I am today or have been for some time." And this happened Friday, and we've had the weekend to sort of mull it over. And since then, we've had some reactions from the Guardians of the Galaxy cast and some from Marvel as well, but we'll get into that a little bit later.
Yeah, I guess, we should talk about the extent of what these tweets are, because just saying that, what, in broad terms, what they're about, I think can give people the wrong idea. Maybe. As far as I'm seeing, at least in these screenshots that they've put together, these are all jokes, right?
Yeah.
And they're all like, I don't know.
These are all jokes that are meant to be shocking in and of themselves. It's intentionally blue humor. It's intended to make you open your mouth and gasp because it's something that's that is actually supposed to be offensive but not meant to be taken literally or seriously. It is like this is one of the many facets of comedy, and it's nothing that is intended to be taken as anything that James Gunn actually believes in or partakes in or anything like that. It's like a more extreme equivalent of everybody in high school at some point, I'm sure, heard those jokes about dead babies, they're the kind of jokes that you tell to get a response out of somebody, and that's exactly what they're intended to do. And for the longest time, James Gunn's career and his focus was on creating comedy that shocked people, that was intentionally inappropriate and provocative. And that's why he made movies with Trauma. Romeo and Juliet is a movie that is exactly intended to do just the same thing. And the fact that he's being held accountable for these jokes that are, some of them nearly a decade old, as being something that he is believing and supportive of, is absolutely ludicrous. Not only because has the state of comedy changed and what is, kind of okay to make fun of that kind of thing is a little bit different now, but it's just these are intended to be jokes, and that's comedy works in a variety of ways, and some of it is in ways that people don't entirely understand, especially if you come from, a place where you have conservative beliefs. And so it might be hard to understand for some of these people, but at the end of the day, it's not the content of these jokes that people actually care about. It's what James Gunn stands for as a person outside of these jokes that has actually ruffled feathers. Yeah, and let's be clear here. You're not saying that these jokes would be okay to tweet out today. No, not at all. Not by any means. But honestly, they're not even necessarily okay to tweet out at all. But it's not something that is justifiable to fire somebody, and it's not something where you can make the leap that, you know, oh my gosh, this is such a terrible person. It's like that's not how comedy works, and that's not what these tweets are about.
Yeah, I did want to read, like, you know, some of these pedophilia tweets. Like, you know, one of them is, I'm going to read this from James Gunn account. This hotel shower is the weakest ever. Felt like a 3-year-old was peeing on my head. So, I mean, it's not a funny joke, but I also don't think it's like him claiming he's, you know, trying to rape a young child. You know, he tells someone to tell your 3-year-old you're laughing thinking of me fucking 3PO. He'd appreciate it when he's older. Like, not particularly funny, but I also don't think that, you know, this comes in the shadow of the Roseanne getting fired. What was that, 2 weeks ago or a couple weeks ago? Over, you know, some racist, insensitive tweets. You know, these weren't tweets that were sent a decade ago. You know, she's made a lot of comments over the years that should have gotten her fired. These were things that she said recently after basically Disney kind of, you know, warned her not to, you know, go over the line. And I think there is a difference here. There's with these tweets, I'm not saying that these tweets are okay, but it is interesting. You know, a few years ago, I think he even issued a statement, not about the tweets, but about the blog post he did and his humor in general. And it was through GLAAD, because I think it was about some insensitive remarks about gay people. And you know, at that time, he basically said that this isn't me anymore. That, you know, I have grown as a person. I used to think this was funny. It's not, you know, and clearly if you know, watch the Guardians films, they're a very inclusive, they have a very inclusive message to them. Is there anything anybody else wants to say about the tweets themselves before we move forward?
I guess just to sort of, recategorize a little bit of what HT was talking about. Like, there was a controversy on Twitter, but it's not a controversy in the sense that, like, in a traditional sense, it was more of like a concerted effort by these, you know, alt-right personalities to, like, specifically to get James Gunn fired because of this. It wasn't like there was a genuine controversy that was stirred up here because of, you know, and like you're saying, anything that he said recently. This was them, you know, purposefully going back through and digging up stuff and orchestrating basically like an attack on his character, with the sole goal of getting Disney to pay attention, you know, being loud enough to get Disney to pay attention to, so they would fire him. And that's exactly what they did. So you know, I just wanted to let people know that it wasn't like a genuine controversy, like a lot of things are in our in our world these days. Yeah, this was more of like a concerted effort. Yeah, I agree with that. It was definitely a bad faith attack against James Gunn for a lot of his beliefs and comments against President Trump and other sort of conservative issues, and definitely became a widespread orchestrated attack against him.
So we can
also just to further point, like, show the evidence of that, similar pundits, and I think actually even Cernovich himself again now has been going after comedian Michael Ian Black for jokes that they're deeming inappropriate and offensive, and like calling for like boycotts of him doing book tours and signings and shit. And then some people are now trying to attack Patton Oswalt. And what's hilarious about this is they're doing it with tweets that he made that were intentionally misleading and meant to be taken out of context sometime in the future. And now people are using them as if they're things that he actually said that he believed in. It's like you can't write parody this like good. It's unbelievable what the depths of these people are sinking to.
So we all agree that the people responsible for this, it is political motivations, right? It's not that they, you know, all of a sudden stumbled across these tweets and were like appalled and like, we need to make sure Disney knows that, you know, someone who is making films for children said these things.
Yeah. And if you want to know like what kind of person led this campaign behind it, one of the tweets going around from Mike Cernovich is where he says, "Have you guys ever tried, quote unquote, raping a girl without using force? Try it. It's basically impossible. Date rape does not exist." So these are the kind of wholesome, conservative, family value-centric people that we're dealing with who got James Gunn fired.
And the thing is, Disney would have been aware of James Gunn's persona and image before he signed on to Guardians of the Galaxy. Also because of the previous controversy he had in 2012 where he had to issue an apology, and it was a sincere apology for the blog post he wrote before. So why now? Why in response to like this obvious orchestrated attack against him? And is that a dangerous sort of precedent that it sets?
Okay, I think we've set this up good enough. So I want to ask you, HT, what are your thoughts on this firing?
I don't think the tweets were good. I think that whatever the jokes that he made were unacceptable. Are unacceptable today and unacceptable back then. But I think that Disney reacting to this bad faith attack against James Gunn in this manner is not helpful, and it honestly only aids the sort of alt-right movement to attack like filmmakers and people who have opinions against the Republican Party or against conservatives, and it's honestly, I think it's dangerous. Like I was saying before, I think it's going to lead to even more like sort of orchestrated attacks against people like Brad was saying is already happening against Patton Oswalt and other comedians.
Yeah, and I would say I'm not defending Gunn in any way, but 10 years ago, the climate was much different. If you went and listened to Howard Stern, for instance, you would hear humor much like this, much like many of these jokes, and it was considered. Maybe it wasn't acceptable, but it was considered acceptable for, the public airwaves. Even Howard Stern has changed. You used to have this group of whackpackers, one who was named Gary the Retard. He's still on the show, but he's now called Gary the Conqueror. Even Stern has kind of, evolved and grown. It is, I don't know. I think it's sad that we are taking this out of context. We are, these are jokes that were made, nearly a decade ago. And, obviously this person has grown since then. He's not the same person. Does that, should he have been fired by Disney? In my mind, what should have happened, I'm just a blogger. I don't know anything, but Disney should have given him the chance to apologize to the public, do a public apology and then, field the room, see how the public reacts, see, if, there is some forgiveness there, if there, it seems, I mean, having met James Gunn and spent time with him, many times over the years, he just seems like a nice dude that is trying to do good things. And, he seems like, when we were all in high school and we'd say things to shock people because we thought he seemed like that was what his gimmick was. That was what his brand was before he came into what he is now doing. And I don't honestly believe that he, believed in insensitivity or that he believed in pedophilia or, do you know what I mean? I don't believe, there's a difference here between someone like this and, Kevin Spacey, or Bill Cosby or any of these people being accused in the Me Too movement. It's just, I don't know. Ben, do you have any thoughts here?
Yeah, I mean, there's, like you're saying, there's a difference between joking about something as I guess, unsuccessful as most of those jokes of his old tweets are, and then actually doing something. And so that, there's a line that needs to be drawn right there. And it's so baffling to me that Disney would would react so quickly in this situation without just sitting back and seemingly applying any level of analyzation or nuance to this situation at all, and just giving in so quickly. I mean, it sounds alarmist maybe to call it dangerous like HT is doing, but I think I agree with her. I think it really, like, you know, when you take away the baseline level of reality of like what are the rules in a business or in the framework of a corporation like this or a society at large, what are the rules? And when you just suddenly shift the ground so drastically, then it feels like everybody is standing on shaky ground, and you're sort of like, wait, if this is how it's happening, what is, you know, how do we move forward from this? What is what are the rules here? I saw this piece at Vulture that Mark Harris wrote, and it's called "Disney Should Know the Difference Between James Gunn and Roseanne," and it's a good piece. Maybe we can link to it in the show notes, but I wanted to read one of the paragraphs here. It says, Disney has always fluffed its feathers about how, because of its worldwide brand, anyone associated with its name must be above reproach. But in the wake of its merger with 21st Century Fox, it's going to be responsible for more of what we watch than any other company in America. How the company decides what to punish and what to defend is a question its employees and its customers have a right to ask. And the answer had better be something other than, we'll do it quickly and in a state of panic. So I think that's a good summary of sort of how I feel about this whole thing.
Yeah, that article is linked in the show notes. It goes on to say, you know, a joke, even 1,000 creepy jokes that you wouldn't tell at a dinner table, in a locker room, or anywhere else, is not the same thing as public stereotyping or vilification of groups that are already widely targeted with discrimination and hatred. And he goes on to say, if a company that's all about expression can't draw these distinctions, and worse, if it outsources its judgment about these offenses, about offensiveness, to professional internet trolls, how can any creative artist believe that Disney has their back? It's a great article. And another thing I want to say, because, you know, over the weekend when this news hit on Friday, I kind of, you know, made some tweets because I was just so angry. I was angry because, you know, I love the Guardians movies. It seemed very unfair for this to be happening. I was angry that we have a president that has said so many horrible things, not just on Twitter, but publicly, and he's, you know, elected by us, and he's in office. And, you know, I made some tweets, and over the weekend, as I had more time to think about this and digest this, the more angry I am at Disney that they, you know, were so reactionary and so not willing to take a moment and try to consider, you know, what is the best thing to do in this situation. I also do want to say, I think, you know, some of my tweets that, you know, about Trump and stuff, like, I got the reaction like, oh, you're only defending James Gunn because you like him. You know what? I liked Kevin Spacey. I liked Chris Hardwick. We followed each other on Twitter. You know, I didn't defend either of them. This is different.
Honestly, for me personally too, if there was a more conservative geared comedian who had made similar jokes or anything like that, my stance is the same, simply because of the respect and like the passion and understanding I have for like how comedy works and what it is and the different shades it has. And it doesn't matter what side of the aisle it is. Like this move sets a dangerous precedent, and it just doesn't take a full understanding as to what like James Gunn was doing with those tweets. And it also doesn't take into understanding that like people change, society changes, what is deemed appropriate, you know, changes. And if Disney makes decisions like this, you know, it's hypocritical, because you go back and you look at the history of Walt Disney himself. This was a man who, you know, was sexist and anti-Semitic and all these things. And so the fact that a company like this is being so sensitive to something that isn't even tantamount to being as bad as that, because these aren't things that James Gunn actually believes in or anything like that, is, just, ridiculous to me.
I think it robs also people in these positions of the ability to change. And I mean that by that James Gunn has proven over the years to have changed and bettered himself as a person. And I think that's what we should take into account with these kind of situations, wherein they have old tweets or old stand-up routines that were offensive or were, sexist or racist or what have you not. Whereas, how about we hold accountable people who have not changed or proven not to be willing to change under Disney's employ, such as Johnny Depp and the Pirates of the Caribbean franchise, for example. So I wonder,
we sat in Hall H this weekend as Johnny Depp appeared in character for Fantastic Beasts right before Amber Heard, who there was allegations about abuse there, I guess.
And that was actually brought to court as well.
Yeah, brought to court, was appearing in the same panel, we don't know if she was backstage. It just seemed so uncomfortable. It was so weird. And it's so weird that Warner Brothers would put those two people on the same panel together. Yet, this other thing's happening in this other part of our, movie universe. Chris, we haven't heard from you yet. What are your thoughts on this whole situation?
I mean, yeah, I pretty much agree with everything that everyone said here. And other people have pointed this out too, but one of the messages of the Guardians franchise is all about people growing. All those characters, when we first meet them, are all individually selfish and terrible in their own ways. And as those films progress, especially into the sequel, they learn to adapt and change. And I always felt like that was James Gunn putting himself into those characters. I mean, that I can't even imagine that franchise continuing without him. It so wholly belongs to him, and I almost don't even care about where it goes now. I mean, not even almost. I flat up don't care where it goes now, basically because he's not involved. And as everyone has said on this show, people change. I know for a fact that the person I am today is so different than the person I was 10 or 15 years ago. I think about the person I was in high school, which is a long time ago because I'm an old man. I think about, that person, and I just want to kick his ass for just how intolerant and stupid he was. And,
imagine if there was Twitter and tweets from that, that time.
Yeah, if I had Twitter when I was 13 or 16, I would, it would just be a disaster. And, life is about growing. It's about learning. It's about, becoming more tolerant. That's what you should do as a person. You should grow. And these people attacking James Gunn, they have no interest in growing. They have no interest in adapting or... And, part of their whole stance is they're just terrified and angry at any sort of change in the world. Any sort of betterment for any sort of marginalized group just infuriates these people. And anyone who dares support something like that is a target as far as they're concerned. And it's just such a bad faith thing. And it's also incredibly obvious, too. I don't understand how Disney... does Disney not have a single person on their payroll who understands how Twitter works? It seems bizarre that they would just instantly be oh, all right, James Gunn is fired. I refuse to believe there's not someone at Disney who could have seen through this ruse for what it is. And it really pisses me off. And again, I'm not condoning those James Gunn tweets. They're terrible. They're not even close to being funny. Not even 10 years ago would they be remotely funny. And he was an idiot to tweet them, but he's owned up to them. He's apologized for them. And they're so clearly meant to not be taken literally that it's just very strange that this is happening the way it's happening.
Yeah. And when I tweeted over the weekend about Trump, I got a lot of feedback. I'm this has nothing to do with Trump. It has everything to do with Trump. If Gunn did not have all those tweets about politics and about his, his unhappiness with the current administration and Trump himself, none of this would have happened. This InfoWars universe guy, he's a central guy in the InfoWars universe. It's like, I don't know. It's, we should probably move on to talk about the reaction. A bunch of people involved with Guardians, came out. Sean Gunn, James Gunn's brother, had a series of tweets. I'm going to link all these in the show notes, but I think, Sean Gunn basically says a lot of what we've been saying, that, that his brother was always a kind-hearted guy that, found a niche in, offensive humor. And, he never thought that was actually him. He says exactly what Chris was saying, in quote, "In many respects, the change in my brother was reflected in the change in the Guardians go through. I've heard my brother say many times that when Quill rallies the team with, quote, 'This is the chance to give a shit, to care,' that it's the pep talk he himself needed to hear. It's part of what made working for the Guardians movie so rewarding, such a rewarding experience for the cast, myself included. We managed to find ourselves involved in a big budget superhero movie that was, at the core, deeply personal. That's a gift, and that's why it's good." He goes on. I'm going to link to this. There's other tweets. Dave Bautista has said he's not okay with what's happening to James Gunn, almost making it out to me. It almost seems like he wants no piece of Guardians 3 without James Gunn. What do you guys think? Do you think Guardians 3 is going to happen without James Gunn? Do you think these actors involved might take a stand?
That's like one of the craziest things about this is the first two Guardians movies grossed $1.6 billion for Disney. So, and like Guardians 3, James Gunn had already finished the script. It was supposed to start shooting early next year, I think. And I don't think Disney had officially, Disney and Marvel had officially put it on the calendar yet, but we were all sort of under the assumption that it was coming out in 2020 or 2021 or something like that. This is a huge money-making operation really for Disney and Marvel. So we always talk about how these companies, the bottom line is the only thing that they care about and whatever. And it's like, you would think that if that was actually true in this case, they would have taken a couple extra minutes to really think about this and weigh the consequences of what they're doing. Because I think the quote from Alan Horn, who's the president of production at Disney, said that they had severed their business relationship with James Gunn. So to me, that means they're not using his script, which is already done. It's not only that they're firing him as the director of Guardians 3, it's that they're scrapping all of their projects with him in any capacity. And that means that they're not going to use the script that he wrote. So that means they're going to have to start from scratch on Guardians 3 and bring somebody else in. And like Chris is saying, this franchise is so tied up with James Gunn as a person, and you can really feel him as a filmmaker in these things. This is not just, what is his name? The guy who, Alan Taylor stepping in for Thor: The Dark World, where it doesn't really feel like there's a personality behind the camera. The Guardians franchise, arguably more than any other Marvel movies, really felt like they had an authorship under James Gunn. And I just don't, like Chris, I have zero interest. I love those movies, but I have zero interest in seeing what a Guardians 3 looks like with somebody else writing or directing this movie. Peter, what do you think?
I don't know. I don't know how this series could go forward without James Gunn. I don't know what it would look like. All those song choices are him. All the personalities are him. If you read the Guardians of the Galaxy comic books, I mean, sure, it's based on them, but it is more original than any of the other Marvel movies in my mind. It's crazy. I want to get back to the Guardians on Twitter. Chris Pratt posted a Bible verse from James 1:19 He's a very religious guy. If you did not know, and the Bible verses, understand this, my dear brothers and sisters, let every person be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to anger. It seems like all these people involved in this franchise are very angered with this decision by Disney, and I'm wondering if Disney thought that through. Chris, do you have any thoughts on this?
I mean, like, I don't know how ironclad their contracts are and all the legalities of this stuff, but, you know, I know if this were me and I was in this situation, I would put my foot down. You know, if I firmly believed that James Gunn should not have been fired, as I do as, you know, someone not involved with these films, I would be like, you know, I'm not doing your damn sequel unless you know, make this right. I mean, I don't think Disney will make it right. I feel like it'd be impossible at this point for Disney to hire him back, even though I wish they would. So I really don't know where it goes from here. I mean, Marvel has this whole machine in progress where, you know, all these films are tied together, and, you know, it'd be very hard for anyone to make any sort of definitive opinion about this. But I really don't know what Disney does now. I do think Disney is learning what a big mistake this is, because I haven't seen a single level-headed person say this is a good idea. Like, the only people celebrating this are just terrible people. And, you know, every forward-thinking person I can think of has pointed out what a terrible idea this was on Disney's part. So, again, I don't know if Disney will backtrack. I don't know if, you know, they're willing to admit they made a mistake, but if I were the cast, I would be, you know, making a stink about this, as they should be.
Also, here's something that we haven't really talked about much yet, but let's recall that Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 was meant to kick off the next 10 years of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and James Gunn was meant to be integral in planning that next phase of the cinematic universe by introducing new elements, presumably expanding the cosmic side of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. So this has larger implications just beyond Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. This is a massive decision that will affect the entire future of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, because obviously Marvel has plans for what they plan to do over the next decade, but James Gunn was a big part of that creative direction because of how Guardians was going to, you know, start us down that path. So, you know, getting rid of Gunn is just, it opens the playing field to something completely different, and who knows how they're going to handle that.
Yeah, we should also talk about some other celebrities came out to James's defense, like Selma, Blair, saying that this man is one of the good ones. Fans have started a petition, as they often do, to try to get James Gunn rehired. As of the time we're recording this, I think it has like 210,000 signatures, and that's just in like 2 days or something. I'm not sure if that would, you know, have any effect over at the Mouse House, if like they're gonna, you know, reconsider things based on, you know, a petition on change.org. I'll link to that petition in the show notes in case you do want to sign it. Dan Harmon has deleted his Twitter account after his 2009 video featuring a baby doll rape resurfaced. I'm hearing managers all around Hollywood are telling their clients to, you know, go back and delete their tweets, delete anything that could be considered offensive in the past for their social media. This is going to be, I think something like this has huge ramifications of not just for, you know, Disney and Marvel, but this entire industry. We already see people leaving social media over this. Bobcat Goldthwait, he posted an Instagram post that I wanted to say. He said, I love James Gunn. He's a loyal friend, super talented, passionate, and kind. I wanted to say something. Here it is. Dear at Disney, I would hate for you to come off as hypocritical. So I'm suggesting that you remove my voice from the attraction that's coming to your park. It's called World of Color Villainous. And I reprise the role of Pain, a role I performed in Hercules. You see, here's the deal. Years ago, I made a lot of sarcastically shocking and offensive jokes, many that I'm embarrassed about now, and I would hate for you guys to look bad seeing that I'm openly critical of the president and his administration. And he goes on, I'll link it in the show notes, but it seems like there's a huge backlash coming to Disney over this, and I'm very curious if it's going to if it's going to change their tune any.
Not to bring up a hypothetical, but I was wondering this earlier, and I wanted to say, if Marvel had a panel at Comic-Con like they usually do, I wonder if Disney would have waited until Monday, for example, to announce that James Gunn was fired over these tweets, and if they had waited, maybe the everything would have blown over and they wouldn't have fired him at all. Do you guys think that would have happened?
I mean, I definitely do. I definitely think they would have waited till Monday and, read the temperature of the room. What do you guys think?
Yeah, I agree. If Marvel was there, they would not have gone through with this. Although at the same time, then I guess they run the risk of audience questions about it. But those questions are so heavily screened, and no one had any question about Johnny Depp during the Fantastic Beasts panel. So I do think they probably would have waited until Monday.
Peter, do you think that there's any chance that Disney would bring him back? Do you think that a corporation like that would admit that they acted hastily? Do you think that even if they realize right now, oh crap, we made a mistake, do you think there's any chance that they would, take the pie in the face basically and publicly admit that they were wrong? I
really don't know. I mean, is there any precedent to that? I can't think of one.
There actually is. It's I think it was MSNBC fired a reporter who I think was attacked by the same people over some sort of past tweet. And, after it was pointed out heavily over and over again that, this was in bad faith, MSNBC rehired him and admitted they made a mistake. So, it has happened, but I don't know if Disney would do the same thing.
I think it depends on what happens next as far as behind the scenes dealings, as far as what the cast does, because I'm sure that they're going to be meeting with everybody to discuss what to do, and I would think the discussion would be on the table is to be like that we made a mistake and then maybe we need to fix it, especially if the cast stands their ground and tries to figure out a way to make sure that he's brought back or not make the movie.
Yeah, I don't know. I urge everybody listening to this, go read these tweets. I'll link to them in the show notes. Go read what James wrote. You've heard the context. I mean, I'm sure not everybody's going to agree with, the people on this podcast. But I do think with the context, I don't think he needed to be fired. At least that's my thoughts. When this first broke on Friday, I was angry, and I had not read the tweets. I had heard, that there were, pedophile jokes and, stuff like that. And at first I was like, Disney did the right thing, but this sucks. Do you know what I mean? That was my first thought was, a company like Disney, just like Roseanne, they can't have that. But after reading these tweets, after reading all these comments from all these people, after reading a ton of articles about the situation, I think I'm just under the belief that James Gunn should have come out and apologized. Disney should have had him apologized and went from there. I really don't think he needed to be fired for, comments 8, 9, 10 years old that are, just blue jokes for the most part. Okay, lastly, guys, I know we're going long here. We've talked a little bit about, what would the Marvel Cinematic Universe look like for the future without James Gunn. But I don't know, like, do you think that Marvel will go through with a Guardians 3 without him? And if so, who could they possibly even hire? Like, I saw some people tweeting about this. Some people mentioned, what's his name? Luc Besson, which is weird because isn't he also getting, some...
Yeah, I think he has some rape allegations
up
against him right now.
Yeah, I don't think Disney is going to go for that one. So, do you guys have any thoughts? Any, I know we're like, what can Disney possibly do with this franchise? Like, do they just hang it up? Like, I mean, Guardians 2 and Avengers, 3 and 4 could be the end of the Guardians storyline. You don't need to make further Guardians movies. Or will they hire a new director, and who could that possibly be? Ben, do you have any thoughts?
The director should be no one. They should. This whole thing is so ludicrous that I hate that Disney has made this decision and that Disney is as big as they are, because I want to see not just the cast stand up, but the consumers, people, regular audience members who are aware of this and have looked at it beyond just a quick, outrage headline. And I want people to understand what this means for the industry going forward, and to say, we don't, we're not okay with this. And I don't want to, the idea. So look, we always, we were debating this in our Slack channel earlier, the idea of writing an article about who should maybe direct Guardians 3, right? And I think for me, it's anytime somebody gets fired off a project or whatever, it's normally, creative differences or, things that we don't know the extent of why a person was removed. Always, sometimes that comes out later, but, Lord Miller or whatever, any sort of big problem behind the scenes, it's normally a clash of styles, right? It doesn't have anything to do with controversy. So for us to even entertain the idea of, who should direct Guardians 3, to me, that seems like we're siding with Disney on this, because that ultimately is who could step in to make this multi-billion-dollar corporation even more money? And I just am not interested in even thinking about that. The thought experiment of that is just the last thing that I want to think about. So do you know what I'm saying?
No, that's a really good point. I just don't. I'm just so bummed out, guys. I'm just so bummed out over this. I'm bummed out over Snap. I'm bummed out over Comic-Con, which is kind of a bummer. I just don't know. Do you guys have any additional thoughts to round this up? Final thoughts.
I have one thing. I know I've just went on a rant, so I apologize for talking a lot. One thing that I was sort of saving till the end was everybody has, said a lot of things on this podcast about the ideal of being tolerant toward people and allowing people to change. And I think that's really important, and something that as a society we all need to sort of strive to be better about. I know I do personally. When somebody wrongs me or slights me in any way, I tend to hold a grudge and whatever, and that's something I need to work on. But I think there's a huge difference between some of the stuff that has happened, even with assault and harassment and those sorts of allegations, even within our industry, like the online film writing industry, and the idea of letting those people grow and change and whatever. The line that I'm drawing is those people actually did something wrong, and James Gunn did nothing wrong. He tweeted jokes. He didn't actually commit these acts, And I think that's something in all of these bad faith takes. They're trying to blur the line between what is right and wrong, and I think we just have to keep those distinctions separate, because that's really a very important aspect in this entire conversation. Is did somebody physically do something to someone else, or was this just a person being a dick? You know what I mean?
I think this brings us to the end of today's Slash Film Daily, a very serious episode. I've linked to everything we have talked about in the show notes, so if you're trying to find any of those tweets, that article that Ben mentioned, the petition to bring James back to Guardians of the Galaxy and Marvel. You can find all that in the show notes. This podcast, Slash Film Daily, is published every weekday on slashfilm.com and all the popular podcast apps. Please feel free to send us your feedback, questions, comments, concerns to peter@slashfilm.com, and we will see you tomorrow.